first brick hotel. At that time, the first floor featured a drugstore, restaurant, barbershop, and a sample room for traveling salesmen. Behind the hotel was a 75-car garage. In 1928, the Hotel Colquitt was torn down and replaced with a new 4-story red brick building. Like its predecessor, it was known as the Hotel Colquitt. As before, a drugstore occupied the corner of the first floor. The hotel also had a coffee shop and a telegraph office on the first floor. In the 1950s, the Hotel Colquitt advertised that all 75 rooms had a bath and 50 had air conditioning, and proclaimed that it was the best hotel of its size in the South. The hotel's Plantation House restaurant was known far and wide for good food and warm hospitality, especially during the years that a Mr. Leo Guest proudly managed the hotel. As late as the early 1950s, most people stayed in hotels while traveling. There had been cabins and motor courts near Spence Field, an air pilot training base for servicemen and their families, but most businessmen and traveling salesmen did stay at the Hotel Colquitt. However, in 1954, things began to change when several new motels opened in Moultrie. One of these was the Town Terrace Motel, and it was one of the first. Still in operation today, the Town Terrace was the first motel in Moultrie with a swimming pool. With our climate, it became a popular family stop. In 1955, Brady's Motel opened, and others soon followed. By today's standards for lodging, these early motels would be considered very basic. But at the time, they were considered first-class accommodations for the traveling public. Motels quickly became the preferred choice for overnight lodging. If you were traveling with the family, it was easier and cheaper to stay in a motel than in a downtown hotel. And after a day on the road, who could resist the temptation of a motel's swimming pool? As a result, most traditional hotels across America went out of business. In the 1960s, Moultrie's Norman Hotel closed, but the Hotel Colquitt was able to hang on because it had long been a popular lodging space for tobacco buyers. For decades, Moultrie had local tobacco auctions each year, and agents sometimes came for months to buy tobacco from local growers. But by the 1970s, large tobacco companies began bypassing local tobacco auctions, instead buying directly from individual growers. The decline in Moultrie's tobacco market forced the Hotel Colquitt to close. This left motels as the only form of overnight lodging for the traveling public in Colquitt County. Businesses continued to use the first floor of the Hotel Colquitt building, facing along Main Street and Central Avenue, but most of the rest of the building sat sadly vacant. In the mid-1990s, Moultrie Southwest Georgia Bank bought the Hotel Colquitt building and financed its conversion to an assisted living facility known as the Colquitt Community Retirement Inn. The business, however, failed, and the bank had to foreclose on the property. In 2003, the bank sold the property to the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation. The trust, in turn, sold the old hotel to Hal Carter of Sylvester, Georgia. Carter was experienced in rehabilitating historic buildings and transformed the old hotel to office, retail, and apartment spaces. In 2006, the old Hotel Colquitt building reopened as the Colquitt Tower. In terms of architectural style, the Colquitt Tower has elements of classical revival design. The building's first floor features a series of arched windows and entrances, all of which were fitted with individual awnings. Round medallions are located between each window and each entrance. The first floor is set off from the rest of the building with an engaged cornice. Along the top of the building, facing Main Street and Central Avenue, is a more massive cornice topped by a balustrade and 4 faux stone urns. The entrance to the Colquitt Towers lobby is located on West Central Avenue. The Colquitt's lobby interior is perhaps the most purely Adams-style interior in a commercial building in downtown Moultrie, and a color palette of pale pastel hues. Next, as you leave the Colquitt Tower, cross Central Avenue and proceed south along Main Street. This block once was home to such stores as McClellan's, JCPenney, and Sears, and was Moultrie's busiest retail area. Cross over First Avenue and proceed half a block to your right to the old Colquitt Theater. The Colquitt Theater was built in the early 1940s with 1,250 seats. It was Moultrie's premier showcase for motion pictures for 3 decades. Its owner was Charles Powell, a brilliant movie showman shown here at the grand opening of the theater. Powell brought the very best in projection and stereophonic sound to his patrons. Of the first were an elaborate contour curtain with changing colored lights, inspired by New York's Radio City Music Hall, a mural in the theater's foyer, and many other state-of-the-art amenities. Children of this community fondly remember Saturday afternoons at the Colquitt. In 1956, a fire broke out. Fortunately, all 600 moviegoers in the theater escaped without injury, but the theater suffered over $250,000 in damages. Over the next 2 years, the theater was rebuilt with extensive remodeling. Although many internal changes were made, the facade of the theater's exterior is relatively intact from its original condition. The Colquitt Theater reopened for business in 1958. In the 1970s, new seats were added, allowing the Colquitt to advertise itself as the Rocking Chair Theater. But the growing popularity of the Moultrie Twin Cinema out in the new Sunset Plaza shopping center doomed the Colquitt Theater, and in 1978, it ran its last movie. The building sat vacant for the next 15 years. Then in 1993, the city of Moultrie received a grant to remodel the theater for its use as a senior center. Since then, the city has owned and maintained the landmark structure, and it is greatly enjoyed by our senior citizens. It has even hosted a few senior weddings. Notice its curved exterior facade, smooth surfaces, streamlined appearance, and emphasis on vertical projection. This style evolved from Art Deco style, but the ornate surface decoration of Art Deco gave way to simplified lines with less decoration. Art Moderne also gave more emphasis to surfaces and new industrial materials, such as the section of glass blocks seen on the upper facade of the theater. The Colquitt Theater is an excellent and sole surviving example of Art Moderne architecture in downtown Moultrie. Now proceed east toward the Courthouse Square to the large red brick building on the corner of First Avenue and Main Street. In 1912, local contractor Anton Huber built the commercial building on the site of a former carriage house and cotton warehouse. Originally, the building was intended for use as a department store and for offices. The department store never materialized. Instead, the Citizens Bank became the building's main client, occupying the corner of the ground floor. Adjacent to the bank along Main Street were a hardware store, an auto supply store, and a furniture store. From the front, the building appears to have 4 stories. This is because the ground floor along Main Street was designed as prime commercial space with extra tall ceilings. In reality, the rest of the building consists of 5 floors with a full basement. At the time of its construction, the commercial building was the largest structure in downtown Moultrie in terms of square footage. Even today, it remains downtown Moultrie's largest and highest building, surpassing even the courthouse in total floor space. Today, the commercial building is sometimes referred to as the Turner's Building in reference to its current residence of 56 years, Turner's Dress Shop. The corner first floor area that once housed the Citizen Bank today is occupied by a restaurant and bakery. Other businesses occupy the remaining space along Main Street and along the side street. The commercial building's design is typical of that found in turn-of-the-century downtowns across America. Except for hotels and churches, the first floors of most downtown buildings housed businesses, while the higher floors were used for office and storage. The commercial building's most distinctive architectural features are the cornices near the roof and the rusticated stone blocks found on the exterior of the first floor. Also, all of the small windows facing Main Street and First Avenue have identical stone lintels at the top of the window frames. These are not only decorative, but provide support for the window openings. Now, cross Main Street at the light and proceed south along Main Street to the unattached 2-story brick building on the left. This is the Grand Theater. The Grand Theater was one of Moultrie's first motion picture theaters featuring silent movies with piano accompaniment. Built before 1920, the theater enjoyed great popularity in the silent era and on into the sound era. In the 1920s, it was a special evening to come to the Grand Theater. Unlike most theaters, the Grand originally had no marquee. Later, a marquee was added over the entrance to the theater. One of the delightful features of the Grand's marquee is the decorative treatment of its metal ceiling. Another later addition was a lighted vertical sign that said, "Theater." In 1929, the Grand faced competition for the first time. Located around the corner on 2nd Avenue, the new Moultrie Theater was much larger, more lavish, and featured the newest projection and sound equipment. Unable to compete for the latest releases, the Grand Theater became an outlet for second-run and B-movies. The Grand Theater closed in the early part of World War II and was later used as a frame shop, a card shop, and a warehouse. The old building slowly deteriorated and in recent years has been vacant. Then in 2007, Moultrie attorney Billy Fallon financed its restoration and commissioned interior designer John McCall Jr. to assist with the building's renovation and restoration. On the exterior of the facade, the Grand Theater was restored to its original appearance. However, an important change was necessary for the interior. With 350 seats, the Grand Theater had a narrow shotgun design with a small orchestra pit and stage. Like other theaters, it had a sloping floor so that all patrons would have a clear view of the screen, the stage, or the performer. However, for the restored building to attract interest in today's real estate market, it would have to be adapted for non-theatrical use. Therefore, a new flat floor was constructed over the theater's original sloping floor. Otherwise, the theater's walls, ceilings, stage, balcony, and other parts of the interior have been restored to their original appearance, with a roof front of red terracotta tiles and a gray cornice with dentils. The Mission Revival building is architecturally significant because of the eclectic Spanish influence seen in this roof, and because of important interior details that represent the mission and arts and craft style. These elements are still intact in the interior, as is the theater's balcony and stage. Next, proceed south to the corner of Main Street and 2nd Avenue. Take a left and walk 1 block east. The 3-story brick building on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 1st Street is the Norman Hotel building, once Moultrie's second largest hotel. The site of the Norman Hotel building originally was occupied by the Central Hotel, a 2-story wooden structure built in the 1890s. In 1902, the Central Hotel burned. Subsequently, a 2-story wooden structure named the Southern Hotel was built on the site. Jeremiah B. Norman was a local businessman who had grown wealthy from timber and naval stores in the 1890s. He then moved to Moultrie from nearby Norman Park, and he began buying property and constructing buildings in downtown Moultrie. In early 1908, Norman bought the Southern Hotel. Later that year, a fire broke out in the vicinity of the kitchen, and the entire hotel burned down. Norman then built a 3-story red brick hotel, which he named the Norman Hotel. The new hotel was the second largest in Moultrie and featured steam heat and electric lights. In 1915, Moultrie's postmaster rented a section of the Norman Hotel's 1st floor for use as a post office. The hotel continued to house Moultrie's post office until the new federal building was completed in 1919. After the post office moved out, the front corner of the hotel was remodeled to serve as a restaurant. The Norman Hotel apparently did well. For one thing, it was the closest hotel to the passenger train depot, located only a few blocks away. At the time, most businessmen and salesmen traveled by rail, and by 1920, Moultrie was served by 14 passenger trains daily. So, the Norman Hotel's proximity to the train depot was important. Evidence of the hotel's commercial use is the sample room on the 1st floor for traveling salesmen to display their wares. Also, a smaller building adjacent to the hotel housed a barbershop and served as a hotel annex. In the 1950s and in the 60s, the Norman Hotel suffered the fate of most small-town hotels across America. The declining use of passenger trains and the rising popularity of motels forced the Norman Hotel to close in the 1960s. Since then, the ground floor of the building has been used for various commercial purposes, primarily luncheon and specialty shops. In terms of architectural style, the Norman Hotel building is typical of early 1900s downtown commercial buildings. The main design features worth noting are the cornice along the edge of the roof, the 8 paired windows, and the 3 ventilation dormers that project from the hotel's sloping roof. Originally, there were pediments above the front doors, but these no longer remain. Also, the brick exterior outside the 1st floor on the front half of the building has been covered with masonry facing. Currently, the rooms on the 2nd and 3rd floor are vacant. Next from the hotel, proceed 1 block north along 1st Street at the corner of 1st Avenue, cross over 1st Street. Now walk 1 block east to the castle-like building on the corner of 1st Avenue and 2nd Street, the old county jail. In terms of architecture, the Old County Jail is one of the most distinctive buildings in Moultrie. Its Gothic Revival style features turrets at the top of each corner, with battlements along the top of the 4 walls and a tower. Its appearance is reminiscent of a European castle. There is one other Gothic Revival jail in Georgia, the old Greene County Jail in Greensboro, which was built around 1807. Colquitt County's old jail was built in 1915 by Southern Structural Steel Company of San Antonio, Texas, at a cost of $28,000. The 3-story building is constructed of concrete and steel, covered with red brick walls and granite trim. Originally, the 1st floor was used as the living quarters for the sheriff and his family. Later, the sheriff moved out, and the 1st floor